With the tight end position being inconsistent and a roller coaster every single week, we find ourselves in a spot where really we just don't want to take a zero with them. So we end up trying to hunt down the guys that we feel are going to have the most volume, and sometimes that just doesn't work out. So maybe we should start hunting down the guys that present the most upside because their efficiency is off the charts. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Today we are wrapping up our position-specific videos on volume versus efficiency, and we're going to be talking about the most efficient tight ends in all of football last season. And then next week, we've got 2 more videos to wrap up this entire series, and we're going to be talking about the players that either saw the biggest drop or the biggest jump from volume to efficiency. Before we hop into all the content though, I got to give away a draft guide for free. And if you remember last week in my wide receiver volume monster video, I had a little bit of a snafu with the editing, and I told everybody, hey, if we hit our like goal and you leave an F in the chat for me, I'll pick somebody from the comment section to win a free draft guide. Congratulations, George Octavio. He's getting a 2024 fantasy football draft guide for absolutely free. And George, make sure you hit us up, info@thefantasyheadliners.com, so we can get you set up and get you your access as soon as possible. And if you really want our draft guide, but you've been waiting to try and win a giveaway to get it for free, you might as well purchase it now. Only $21.99, and if you win any of our giveaways in the future, we'll just end up refunding you the cost anyway. The link to order yours is in the description down below, and this thing is chock full of fantasy football knowledge, and we are adding more to it almost every single day. Make sure you get yours now. There's going to be a lot of information that you'll need to be successful this season. All right, enough of that. Here we go. Number 1, the first category that we're going to be taking a look at today is catch percentage. And for the tight end position, there's some guys that are way up there in catch percentage. Cole Kmet, Evan Ingram, and Dalton Kincaid all finished within 80% catch percentage or higher last season. And I absolutely love that for a guy like Evan Ingram because he destroyed the volume categories this past season. Received more volume than a majority of the tight ends in the league. And he did a lot with that volume. Maybe the upside wasn't always there because he wasn't breaking super big plays and he wasn't scoring a ton of touchdowns. But to have all the volume that he did and still catch over 81% of your targets is insane. Now, Dalton Kincaid, it's good to see that as well. And hopefully if he sees a bump in his volume this season, the rest of it will take care of itself. The catch percentage will stay here and his efficiency will get better and better. And while I love to see it for Cole Kmet, I'm still very worried about him returning his value on draft day. If you're drafting him to be like a low-end tight end one, it could end up being just fine. He should still see some targets this season, but the volume that he saw the last couple of years with Justin Fields just won't be there. Now, there were only 4 tight ends to manage a catch percentage below 70% this past year. And for Hunter Henry and Juwan Johnson, those are big concerns for me because those 2 guys didn't see a lot of volume last season. So they need to take advantage of all the targets that they get. Now for Hunter Henry, based on who his quarterback was at the time last season, the targets may not have been that great. And we broke this down in my wide receiver video. Catch percentage, you cannot just rely on by itself. You have to take other things into consideration with it. And obviously, if you have a poor quarterback that just isn't giving you that great of targets, it's going to be hard to haul them all in. Now, I would like to see David Njoku with a little bit of a higher percentage, absolutely, but his volume was fantastic last season. But if he's going to lose any of that volume this year, because in the past, Deshaun Watson just really hasn't looked his way, he's going to need to step it up and take advantage of the targets that he does get. And Kyle Pitts, this also could be attributed to his quarterback. 61.6 catch percentage is nearly not good enough. But once again, how quality were the targets he was getting anyway? All right, let's move on over to yards per target. And at the top of the list are going to be a few names that don't surprise anybody. George Kittle, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, names that are synonymous with being one of the top tight end performers in all of football. But Jonnu Smith being up this high while he was in Atlanta last season is definitely a great thing to see. And we know Jonnu Smith I mean, he's a guy that I continue to chase every single season, has some big play potential. He went from being a potential breakout when he was in Tennessee, then he goes to Atlanta and he's fighting with Kyle Pitts for targets, and then all of a sudden he becomes the #1 tight end, and then he disappears because, well, Arthur Smith, and then now he's going to be in Miami. Let's keep him in mind the rest of the video. And obviously, George Kittle stands above the rest. Averaged over 11 yards per target last season, over 2 yards more than Mark Andrews, who was #2. And then we mentioned it a second ago with Evan Engram. Great catch percentage last season, but it didn't really feel like he had the upside in any given week. And with yards per target, we see that now down below. Finished very, very low in this category last season. And again, it had to do with the fact that he just didn't see a ton of big plays. When he got the ball in his hands, he got it frequently, but he wasn't breaking off huge gains and wasn't scoring big touchdowns. All right, now yards per reception, and seeing Kyle Pitts this high is great. At times last season, when you watch the film of Kyle Pitts, it did feel like he may have been a little bit slow, or some of that explosiveness that we saw in college just wasn't there anymore. But then when you take a look at the numbers show us that that explosiveness is still there. And that's going to be the key for him this season. He is on a lot of people's radar as the next breakout candidate. He has suffered enough in Atlanta, and now he's going to be getting a top-tier quarterback in Kirk Cousins. This is going to be the make or break year for Kyle Pitts, and his efficiency is going to be a big key contributor to whether or not he ends up reaching top tight end numbers, or if once again he's a guy that sees a decent amount of volume but just can't quite turn it into enough fantasy points to make it worthy of starting him every single week. Also, a guy like Dalton Schultz, who finished pretty high last season, is going to have to be ultra efficient again in 2024. Last year, you had really Nico Collins with his breakout year, and Tank Dell is a rookie that, yeah, he was on and off the field a little bit. You were probably trying to find some footing with him. So Dalton Schultz was kind of a safety blanket last season for CJ Stroud. But CJ Stroud loves Tank Dell. Tank Dell should be healthy now. Nico Collins had his breakout, still going to be a big portion of this offense. And of course, they've added Stefon Diggs. How much volume will still be there for Dalton Schultz? And at the beginning of the video, when I mentioned sometimes chasing that volume just doesn't work out because our tight ends just don't consistently get volume sometimes, we have to find the guys with the most efficient numbers to take advantage of the volume that they do get. And Dalton Schultz could end up falling into that category for 2024. Now, Dalton Kincaid being as low as he is in this list right now is a little bit concerning for me because last season he had some pretty decent weapons around him with Stefon Diggs on one side, and then you had Gabe Davis, the field stretcher, on the other side. Having wide receivers like that around you should lead to a little bit better of yards per reception because you're going to have some more open room around the middle. And now that we're going to be moving back from those wide receivers, and you've got some guys on the team now that are either on the younger side or rookies, you got to wonder if those yards per reception end up staying in this area, or if we can really get them to go up. Dalton Kincaid should be in for a jump in volume, but efficiency could be the area where we see not that big of a gain this season. Yards after the catch per reception, and there were 3 players last season that were head and shoulders above everybody else. And I don't think when you look at the list that you find it surprising to see a guy like David Njoku or George Kittle in this area. But once again, Jonnu Smith popping up very highly, especially in the company of these two, is something to keep an eye on. And I love to see Jake Ferguson here as well. He's going to be a name that we talk about a little bit more at the end of the video. But overall so far, he scored pretty good in efficiency. We've got one area that we need to fix with him, though. Now, Gerald Everett doesn't have great numbers in really any of the categories that we've talked about so far. He was pretty good in yards after the catch per reception, though. And we do need to keep in mind, we've talked about Cole Kmet and my concerns about him this season, but we never really mentioned Gerald Everett in those concerns. The concerns are about new rookie quarterback that may not like him as much as Justin Fields did, adding Keenan Allen, adding Rome Odunze, still having DJ Moore, but now you also have Gerald Everett as the tight end too there. If they run some more 2 tight end sets, what is that going to look like? Is Cole Kmet maybe going to be spelled a little bit more? We know Gerald Everett has some big playability with him. If he's on the field a little bit more than we would like, that's going to kill Cole Kmet. Now, a huge drop off from yards per reception to yards after the catch per reception was Kyle Pitts, who goes from number 2 to number 24, which really, for the most part, means that Kyle Pitts did his damage down the field and then really didn't do anything after that, which is great in terms of the fact that Kyle Pitts can still take advantage of some of those mismatches, and he's going to win those mismatches down the field. But after he catches the ball, is he really doing a whole lot with it? That's where we need to see a little bit more of a step up, and maybe in this coming year, we will see that. I'm actually shocked to see TJ Hockenson so low here, and we haven't mentioned him a whole lot in this video because if you draft TJ Hockenson this season, you're kind of drafting him under the hopes that at some point in time, he comes back and he feels fully healthy, but we really don't know when that's going to be as of yet, coming off of his ACL tear from last season. So you're taking a shot in the dark with TJ Hockenson this season, and unfortunately for me, it's just not warranting a draft pick at this time. All right, let's go ahead and bring up points per snap now. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Tanner Hudson leading the way. Now, Tanner Hudson was a guy last season that I talked about on the waiver wire a couple of times because he was getting a decent amount of targets at one point. But the Cincinnati Bengals have kind of reshaped their tight end position this year. They've added Mike Gesicki, and they drafted Eric All, and they still have Drew Sample there as well. So even though Tanner Hudson was a guy last season that seemed to maybe be ready to contribute a little bit more, and some of these numbers may suggest that he could help out, I just don't see that happening with the players around him. And really, when we look through points per snap, there's not anything here that stands out to me. A lot of our top fantasy contributors last season are at the top of the list here. A lot of the tight ends that play a whole lot of snaps but don't get a whole lot of points are at the very bottom of the list here. Most specifically, Cade Otton. And I've seen his name pop up a few times for people that think that he could end up being a breakout candidate in 2024. And realistically, I just don't end up seeing it. And the reason that a lot of people feel like that could happen is because how he was utilized last season. Cade Otton played more snaps and ran more routes than any tight end in all of football. But as you can see here, it just didn't translate. He was used on the field quite a bit. Targets went to Mike Evans, Rachaad White, Chris Godwin, and any of the other number of 3 or 4 different wide receivers they have on the roster there. And it just didn't end up going to Cade Otton that often. So while you would like him to be a breakout candidate, and I can get why you may think that, there's not enough evidence to suggest it's actually going to happen. All right, now we're going to move on over to points per touch. And at the tight end position, there's really one thing that's the name of the game, and it's touchdowns. The more touchdowns you score, the higher you're going to end up finishing in this category. And you absolutely see it with the names that are listed here. Hunter Henry at number 3 hasn't really done anything on this list so far. His volume was poor last season, but he was targeted pretty often in the red zone. And because of that, he scored quite a few touchdowns. And because he scored a few touchdowns, his points per touch is a lot higher. He's going to have to be a key contributor this year in New England, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed it happens. Sam Laporta, who led tight ends in touchdowns last season, obviously finishes high in this area. And then Juwan Johnson, really the red zone threat for the New Orleans Saints, also scores pretty high in this area. Juwan Johnson, great red zone threat, could end up scoring 6, 7, 8 touchdowns in a season with ease. But the problem is he's really only utilized inside the red zone and not in between the 20s. Now a few guys at the bottom of the list. Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, Evan Ingram. This is where things start to really show us, yeah, a guy has a decent amount of volume, but he just doesn't do enough with it. Or he gets a decent amount of catches, but they're catches that don't really materialize into a lot after the catch. So when you take a look at Trey McBride, absolutely propped up last season by a decent amount of volume. Breakout candidate last year, and a lot of people are excited for him once again in 2024. And I still think Trey McBride is going to be very good this year, and he should still see a decent amount of volume. Yeah, they added Marvin Harrison Jr., but I don't think it's going to be enough to take away a ton from Trey McBride because there's not really a whole lot there to take away from him outside of Marvin Harrison. So I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed that while he does take a little bit of a hit in terms of volume, some of that efficiency climbs again with a new alpha on the outside. Dalton Kincaid, we need to see some bigger plays from him, but I already mentioned that a couple of minutes ago and why I'm concerned about that. And for Evan Engram, you know what? I don't care about the rest of it. If he gets as much volume this year as he did last year, I'll invest in Evan Engram. The upside, maybe it will come, maybe it won't. Maybe he'll score some touchdowns. But I know with Evan Engram, I'm never losing any week because of my tight end position. All right, we've officially made our way to the end of the video, and now we need to talk about average score. And keep in mind, our average score is taking all the categories that we talked about today, averaging them out, and then the lower the score, the more efficient you are as a tight end. And there's a few names that will not surprise you, and there's a couple of names that absolutely will. George Kittle, Mark Andrews, and Travis Kelce do not shock anyone in terms of efficiency. George Kittle, he's super efficient. Whenever he has the ball in his hands, he could score from anywhere. He can put out big plays. But it's how much volume he gets consistently that becomes the issue. Mark Andrews, when he's on the field, he's absolutely fine. He just continues to get hurt a little too often. And then Travis Kelce, maybe some of that upside that we've been used to in the past few years disappeared last season, but it could absolutely be back in 2024. But Jake Ferguson, for me, is going to be my breakout tight end candidate of 2024. And last season, I would say it over and over again. Dallas Cowboys, give this man 8 to 10 targets per week. If you do that, fantasy-wise, he is a stud contributor. But Dallas didn't seem to do that. And I think a breakout this season is absolutely in the works. You've got CeeDee Lamb, and then Jake Ferguson should be the number 2 target on your team. Tony Pollard is no longer there, so some of those targets that he had been receiving could go to Jake Ferguson. You obviously have lost Michael Gallup, and you still have Brandon Cooks, but Jake Ferguson should be the next most consistent player next to CeeDee Lamb. And Jonnu Smith, absolute shocker to see him finish so high here. And I love Jonnu Smith. I absolutely was banging for the breakout every single season with him. And now in Miami, maybe that happens. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle are going to see the majority of the targets there. You've got a really strong run game, but Jonnu Smith in a lot of one-on-one matchups where he is going to be the guy that is an absolute mismatch for the defense could end up seeing some really big plays. Is Jonnu Smith a guy that I expect to be a consistent fantasy producer? Absolutely not, but I think he could have some weeks this season where he blows up and he wins your week. Jonnu Smith could be the best ball draft pick you make at the position all year. And then Trey McBride, it's great to see him so high in efficiency here. Once again, he could lose some of the targets over to Marvin Harrison Jr., but if he stays this efficient, it's not going to matter all that much. All right, the next group down, there's a couple of guys we really don't have to worry about and a couple of guys with questions. When you talk about a guy like David Njoku, efficiency-wise, this isn't all that bad. I do not mind seeing him in this area. Would love to see him a little bit higher, but it's the volume that worries me this season. Because if he loses some of his volume, that could end up being okay, and it could end up really hurting him. If he loses a little bit of the volume to Jerry Jeudy, all right, whatever. Bring the efficiency up a little bit, and he's still going to be a really good contributor. But if Deshaun Watson just stops looking his way, and he's only getting like 4 targets a game, the efficiency isn't going to matter at that part. Then you have a guy like Sam Laporta. Would love to see him be a little bit more efficient, but he's so darn good in that offense. We know he's still going to get the volume, and with the numbers that we see here, if he stays in this area, but maybe bumps him up just a little bit going into year 2, he could end up being a guy that just solidifies himself as the number 1 or 2 fantasy tight end in all of football. Cole Kmet and Dalton Schultz, they're in the same boat. Not bad in terms of efficiency, but given the fact that they have some added weapons around them this season, the volume is going to be the key factor in terms of their fantasy contributions. TJ Hawkinson, we just don't know when he's going to be healthy and ready to play. Kyle Pitts, we talked about him a lot in this video already. Obviously, this efficiency isn't all that bad. Volume-wise, it's been there the first few years in the league. So the volume needs to continue to be there, but we need some more quality targets for him, and in return, could help this efficiency a little bit as well. All right, there's two people in particular in this category right here that we need to see a step up from in terms of efficiency heading into 2024. The first one's going to be Dalton Kincaid. He should end up seeing a decent increase in terms of targets. But again, with the weapons that they have there now compared to what they had last season, I have some serious concerns about how much better his efficiency is going to end up getting. Evan Ingram, I've already mentioned it with him as well. The efficiency doesn't bother me that much because of how much volume he gets. Now, if he were to lose any of that volume, the efficiency does need to get better. But I think the one thing we should take from this video is that, yeah, his volume is great, and maybe the efficiency could get a lot better, but there's room for growth here. And even if there's a little bit of growth in efficiency this season, that's a pretty big step up in terms of where he lands in fantasy value. He goes from being a guy that you draft to be like a low-end tight end one that gives you decent volume numbers and a good floor every week to really being a guy that bumps all the way up to maybe a top 4 or 5 tight end if that efficiency can just get better. And then for Dallas Goedert, he's got to get way more efficient as well. Hopefully that will happen this season. And we saw it in the wide receiver video. If you watch that one, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith were not that great in terms of efficiency either. And some of that may end up being from the absolute collapse they had towards the end of the season. We'll just chalk that up to maybe a little bit of bad luck, and they come back from that this year, and the offense is just brand new and clicking on all cylinders. Now, really here at the bottom of the list, there's not really a whole lot that I'm invested in here. Tyler Conklin could end up seeing a few more targets with Aaron Rodgers, but I really feel like the wide receivers are going to be the ones to dominate those touches, along with Breece Hall. Gerald Everett splitting time with Cole Kmet. Chiggy Oko not really being utilized in that offense, even though he should be. Hunter Henry, he needs to take a step up in terms of his efficiency this year. And maybe with some better quarterback play, that could absolutely end up happening, especially if Jacoby Brissett ends up being the starter for a majority of the year. Juwan Johnson, he doesn't see enough targets to be this bad in efficiency. He's got to get better. Cade Otton, I really don't think he's going to get a whole lot better anytime soon. I think he is what he is in that offense. Then for Logan Thomas, he's out of Washington. He did sign in San Francisco. Going to be a backup to George Kittle. If Kittle misses time, Logan Thomas could see some time on the field, but that's not going to help his efficiency any. All right, Headliner Nation, that's going to end up doing it for me. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video, and we're going to wrap up this video series next week when I take a look at all of the players across all of these videos the last 2 weeks, and I find the ones that had the biggest jump or the biggest drop in terms of their volume and efficiency. And maybe that will help us pinpoint some more breakout candidates for 2024. But for now, Headliner Nation, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, turn on the bell notification so anytime we go live or drop new content, you'll know about it right away. And as I make my way out, YouTube is going to recommend a video to you that you may have missed. Click on that if you haven't seen it as of yet. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.